What is at stake in this election? That is the question that many Americans have. And I think that there are two fundamental questions that Americans need to ask themselves, and two fundamental things are at stake. The first is, what direction is this country going to go financially and economically? We live in a time when we have a president who settles for 8.1% unemployment, $16 trillion deficits, 9% increases in the cost of health insurance, double costs increases in energy, 6.7% decline in average income, and the highest amount of poverty since 1996. Yet this president says that we're in a recovery. He also says, and truthfully, that if he talks about the economy, he's going to lose. Now, the president's answer to our financial and economic problems have been to spend more, regulate more, pick winners and losers. The truth of the matter is that there can be legitimate debate about what form of government is the best, but there can be no debate that capitalism and free markets leads to economic growth. That is a fact. That is not even my opinion. It's just a fact. You can look up the numbers. So what really is at stake is what direction we're going to go in the next 4 years. Are we going to continue to see families struggle to make ends meet? Are we going to continue to settle for trillions of dollars in debt? Are we going to continue to have an unconstitutional health care bill that costs jobs and costs consumers money, especially women? Are we going to continue on the same path with a no energy policy other than continuing the Bush era policies? And are we basically going to continue on the regulatory policies that we've seen in the past 4 years and the spending policies, the picking winners and losers? Basically, it's the status quo. And the status quo has sought to really take a free market and overregulate it to a point where we're starting to shift away from a free market, where the government is now has a larger share of the economy, and will continue to do so, especially in 2014 if Obamacare is not repealed. And Obamacare really is actually a big element of this, and I think Obamacare should be one of the things that is on the mind of the American people when they vote this November. Or we can go in a different direction. We could elect a former corporate CEO, former governor as president, who is going to cut taxes, who is going to reduce spending and has put forth a plan to do so, who is going to repeal Obamacare, return power back to states to have more of a decentralized federal government, go back to a regional tax code with regards to some of our corporate taxes. This is Mitt Romney's plan. Mitt Romney is running solely. I mean, Mitt Romney's really running on the economy. If you really look at that's the centerpiece of his campaign, is about returning to free market economics and fiscal discipline. And the case needs to be made at some point that these free market economic policies reduce poverty, reduce unemployment, and create jobs. It's really a cornerstone election because for the first time in decades, we have a president who does not really believe that the free market should go and continue to be free. The last president to regulate this much was Lyndon Johnson, and the result was high unemployment and high inflation. Now, Presidents Reagan, Bush Sr., Clinton, and Bush Jr., despite whatever recessions occurred, we got out of those recessions and we became stronger afterwards. This is a miserable recovery, if it is even a recovery at all. I would argue that it is a temporary recovery because once we're downgraded again, which is inevitable if Obama is reelected, we will be downgraded again. We will have more debt, and there will be fewer jobs because our businesses will have less confidence, both big and small businesses. And eventually, he's going to raise taxes. That's inevitable as well. He might not do it on the middle class the year after he's elected, but it's coming down the pike. And this is really, we're seeing what's going on in Europe right now. And the question that we have to ask ourselves on the economy and on fiscal policy in general, and this has to do with regulatory policy, spending, taxes, healthcare, energy, all these things are really interest rates. They're all really somehow connected. We have to ask ourselves, do we want to restore the economic growth of the 80s and 90s or move in that direction? Or do we want to continue to shift towards the failed economic policies of the late 60s and early 70s and go towards where Europe is today? That is the fundamental question. Now, I'm not suggesting that Mitt Romney is going to come into office if he's elected and the economy is automatically going to grow at 4% and we're going to have no unemployment. That is not what I'm implying. These things take time. Economic changes take time. And, you know, this president will make the argument that, can make that same argument and say, well, his administration has actually made progress and that these things take time. But the problem with his analysis would be then that how come he inherited 7.6% unemployment and unemployment is now at 8.1%. 13 million Americans are still out of work. This is just a failed economic program. We're shifting towards Europe and towards the late 60s and early 70s and the Great Society. We need to shift back towards the growth of the 80s and 90s, which did take time. I mean, President Reagan took office in 1981, and it took really 2 years before we started seeing some serious economic growth. And President Clinton took office during a time of recession. It took about 2 years before we saw economic growth. But now we have President Obama, and he's had more than 3 years, and we have not seen economic growth. We've seen a disappointing, if you want to call it a recovery, which I still say I don't believe we're in a recovery. I think we're at a time when we have exited a recession, but another one looms if this president is reelected. And I mean that sincerely, because if we are going to see more deficits, higher taxes, even more regulations than we've seen the past 4 years. And if Obamacare is implemented, we will lose millions of jobs. So the first choice is really about we could go in a free market American direction, or we can go in a more socialist European direction that President Obama has sought to take us on over the past couple of years, and which he will continue to take us on over the next 4 years if reelected. If Mitt Romney's elected, then we will go, I believe, towards a period of growth, whether it's as impressive growth as we saw in 1983 to 1990 or 1995 to 2002. I don't know. Or even 2003 to 07 when we had some growth then, or even perhaps early 08, I don't know. The second fundamental question, aside from the economy and finances, that Americans are going to have to ask themselves, and what's at stake in this election, is foreign policy. We have a president right now who's done some good things in foreign policy. There's no denying it. He rid the world of the mastermind of 9/11. In my opinion, the worst, undisputably, one of the 3 or 4 worst people. President Obama rid the world of one of the 3 or 4 worst people ever to walk the planet. In fact, I don't even like I don't like saying that in the individual's name because I'm so disgusted with him beyond words, and I don't even like calling him a person. He was dirt to me. And he was responsible for the murders of thousands of people, and I'm grateful that the President of the United States ordered the attack to rid the world of that brutal piece of dirt who the Navy SEALs courageously found, and you know the rest of the story. The president also rid the world of a mental midget and animal, Muammar Gaddafi, who committed genocide on his own people. So in Libya and in Afghanistan, I've tended to actually agree with the president's policy. But beyond that, I really can't say that I agree with the president. I think that this appeasement of radical Islam is extremely dangerous for our country. I think the president's unwillingness to really stand up to Iran, instead writing letters to the Ayatollah, I think is dangerous. This president has had a mixed bag in foreign policy. I think he's done a few good things, but overall, I think he's made a series of errors. I think the best way to defeat the enemy is to build strong alliances, to keep our military strong, to keep those bases open overseas, and to do whatever it takes to stop state sponsors of terrorism from acquiring nuclear weapons. So the president has thrown Israel and Poland and and other countries under the bus with the re-signing of the START treaty with Russia, which I think was one of his biggest foreign policy failures. The president has failed to stop Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. That's dangerous. The president has, through the Justice Department, has sought to, and luckily the public stood up. The whole thing with closing down Guantanamo, that was extremely dangerous to even talk about that, in my opinion, because it indicates to the enemy that we are, it really, I think it brings public something that should not be brought public as much as it was to the enemy, and I think that's a mistake. I respect President Obama as a person, but I don't agree with the decisions he has made as the President of the United States, mainly here at home, but also abroad at times. I give him credit where credit is due, and that is, again, with Gaddafi and in Afghanistan. I think the president needs to focus on stopping Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. He should not be afraid to put military force on the table. I also believe that the president should stand with Israel and not negotiate with the Palestinian terrorists. I think that the direction of foreign policy, in my opinion, is basically a consistent peace through strength foreign policy that Mitt Romney represents, or an inconsistent mixed bag foreign policy that President Obama represents. And too often that is appeasement to radical Islamists who are evil, murderous animals who have no respect for freedom, no respect for liberty, no respect for the rights of women or religious or ethnic minorities. These are evil animals. We need to defeat them, whatever it takes, and I think this president needs to stop appeasing them in too many instances.
Every place that Mitt has gone, he has solved problems that people said were nearly impossible.
Mitt Romney, business legend, rescued the Olympics, the Republican governor who turned around a Democratic state.
I believe the American people are overtaxed and the government is overfed. I believe we're spending too much money, and that's got to stop. I believe our laws ought to be written by the people and not by unelected judges. Look, these are critical times we face. We face attack from jihadists. We face tougher competition than we've ever known before coming from Asia. We're spending too much money here. We're using too much oil here. Our schools are failing too many of our kids. This is not a time for more talk and dithering in Washington. It's a time for action. I believe in the people of America. Free American people are the source of this land's great strength.
I'm Mitt Romney. I'm running for president, and I approve this message.